The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above the Sunrise Diner, casting that harsh white glow over cracked vinyl booths and coffee-stained countertops. For Laura Davis, that sound had become the soundtrack to her survival. At 26, she moved through the narrow aisles with practiced efficiency, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups with the kind of muscle memory that comes from working double shifts for 3 years straight. It was Tuesday, 11:30 in the morning, the dead zone between breakfast and lunch when the diner held its breath. The register had exactly $47.32. Laura knew because she'd counted it twice. Her rent was due in 4 days, and she was short by $200. Again. The bell above the door chimed, and Laura looked up from wiping down table 6 to see a man step inside. He didn't belong here. Everything about him screamed money, from his perfectly tailored charcoal suit to the way he moved with quiet, absolute confidence. His shoes probably cost more than Laura made in a month. He chose the corner booth, sliding onto the worn vinyl with an economy of motion that spoke of someone accustomed to being watched. Laura grabbed a menu and a glass of water, forcing her professional smile into place despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Men like this didn't usually find their way to the Sunrise Diner, unless they were lost. "Good morning," she said, setting the water down. "Can I start you off with some coffee?" The man looked up, and Laura found herself staring into eyes the colour of storm clouds. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of sharp features that belonged on magazine covers. When he spoke, his voice was low and resonant. "Coffee black, and I'll take whatever pie you have that's fresh." "Apple pie it is," Laura said, retreating to the counter. Her co-worker Marcy sidled up beside her, not even trying to hide her stare. "Holy hell, Laura. You see that suit? That's Jason Moore." Laura frowned as she poured the coffee. "Who?" "Jason Moore. Moore Industries. They own half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. That man is worth about $12 billion. Marcy's voice dropped to a whisper. What's he doing in a place like this? Laura glanced over at the billionaire, who was now staring out the window with the focused intensity of someone solving complex problems in his head. She shrugged. Maybe he likes apple pie? When she returned with his order, Jason Moore was examining something in his palm. As she set the plate down, she caught a glimpse of what looked like an old coin, dark with age. "Here you go, sir." Fresh apple pie and coffee. He looked up sharply, his hand closing around whatever he'd been holding. "Thank you." Laura was about to walk away when something caught her eye. As he reached for his coffee cup, his sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing an expensive watch. But it wasn't the watch that made her breath catch. It was what fell from his palm and rolled across the table. A coin, ancient-looking, with strange markings she'd never seen before. Without thinking, Laura reached out and caught it before it could fall to the floor. The metal was surprisingly warm and heavy in her palm. As she examined it, her heart began to race. The markings, the weight, the distinctive green patina around the edges. She knew this coin. 3 months ago, her grandmother had passed away, leaving Laura a small wooden box filled with what the family had assumed were worthless trinkets. Among them had been a coin exactly like this one. Laura had taken it to an antique dealer out of curiosity, and the man's reaction had been immediate and intense. He'd offered her $500 on the spot, then $1,000 when she'd hesitated. She'd walked out without selling it, something about his desperation making her suspicious. The coin was still sitting in her jewellery box at home. "That's an interesting piece," Laura said carefully, holding the coin out to him. Jason Moore's eyes locked onto hers with laser focus. The casual air he'd maintained vanished, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. "Where did you see that before?" The question was so direct, so loaded with meaning that Laura felt her pulse quicken. "I'm sorry." "You recognized it." "I saw it in your eyes." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "That coin is one of 12 ever minted. 11 of them are accounted for, locked away in private collections and museums. The 12th has been missing for over 60 years. Laura's mouth went dry. She set the coin down on the table between them, her hand trembling slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. But she did know. The weight of knowledge settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The coin in her grandmother's box, the one currently sitting in a small velvet pouch next to her mother's pearl earrings, was worth a fortune. Had to be. Jason Moore studied her face with the intensity of a predator reading prey. My name is Jason Moore. I've been searching for that missing coin for 15 years. It belonged to my grandfather, stolen from our family estate in 1962. His voice was steady, controlled, but Laura could hear the undercurrent of obsession. I've followed every lead, traced every rumour, spent millions on private investigators and auction house contacts. He picked up his coin, turning it over in his fingers. This is a replica! A very good one, but still a fake. I had it made to help with authentication when the real one surfaces. His eyes never left her face. But you knew that, didn't you? You've seen the original. Laura felt trapped, pinned between the truth and a lie that was becoming harder to maintain by the second. The smart thing would be to deny everything, to claim she'd mistaken it for something else. But looking at Jason Moore, she realised he wasn't the type of man who accepted convenient lies. My grandmother had some old coins, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I don't know where she got them. The change in Jason Moore was immediate and electric. He leaned forward so quickly that Laura instinctively pulled back. What kind of coins? I don't know, old ones, some foreign, I think. She was improvising now, trying to buy time to think. She never talked about them much. Where are they now? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Laura was only beginning to understand. Jason Moore's entire demeanour had shifted. The polished businessman was gone, replaced by someone desperate and dangerous. I have them, Laura admitted, immediately regretting the words. Jason Moore was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, but somehow more threatening. Miss Davis. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. Men like Jason Moore didn't stumble into diners by accident. I think we need to have a very serious conversation. Laura's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a coincidence. He hadn't wandered in here looking for pie and coffee. He'd come looking for her, which meant he already knew about the coin. The question was how much he knew and what he was willing to do to get it. I need to get back to work, she said, starting to stand. Sit down. The words were quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. Please. Laura remained standing, her hand gripping the back of the booth. I think you should leave. Jason Moore reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward her. It was a photograph of her apartment building, taken from across the street. The timestamp showed it was from this morning. I know where you live, Miss Davis. I know you work here and at the grocery store on weekends. I know your rent is $450 a month and you're currently $200 short. His voice was calm, matter of fact. I know your grandmother was Elena Vasquez, and she died 3 months ago, leaving you a small inheritance of personal effects. Laura sank back into the booth, her legs suddenly unsteady. The world around her seemed to tilt sideways. You've been watching me. I've been watching everyone connected to that coin for 15 years. Your grandmother's name appeared in an estate sale catalogue. Nothing was sold because the family claimed the items first, but the catalogue listed several coins of historical significance. He leaned back, his composure returning. It took my people 3 weeks to track down which family member had claimed them. The casual way he said, my people, sent chills down Laura's spine. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power, about the kind of resources that could make a person disappear if they became inconvenient. What do you want? Laura asked, her voice hollow. Jason Moore smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want to make you an offer you can't refuse. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a leather portfolio, opening it with deliberate precision. Inside were documents, photographs, and what appeared to be authentication certificates. Laura found herself staring at images of coins identical to the one hidden in her apartment, each one accompanied by detailed provenance reports and appraisal values. "The Constantine Solidus," Jason said, his voice taking on the reverence of someone discussing religious artifacts. 12 coins minted in 337 AD to commemorate Emperor Constantine's death. Each one contains 3 ounces of pure gold and bears inscriptions that make them among the most valuable ancient coins in existence. He turned a page revealing auction records. Laura's eyes widened at the numbers. The last one that sold publicly went for $14.7 million. That was in 2019, and it was in far worse condition than the one your grandmother left you. $14 million. The number hit Laura like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what she was hearing. Her grandmother, who had clipped coupons and saved every penny, who had lived in a tiny apartment and wore the same 3 dresses for years, had possessed something worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. "How do you know what condition it's in?" Laura managed to ask. Jason's smile turned predatory. "Because I've seen it. Your grandmother tried to sell it once, about 20 years ago. She contacted several auction houses, but when they started asking questions about provenance, she got scared and backed out." He flipped to another page, showing a photograph of a younger Elena Vasquez standing in what appeared to be an auction house. She was smart to be cautious. "The coin's history is complicated." Laura stared at the photograph of her grandmother, a woman she thought she'd known completely. "What do you mean, complicated?" "It was stolen from my family's estate in 1962 during a break-in. My grandfather had acquired it legally through a private sale, but the thief got away with it and several other pieces. The insurance company paid out, but my grandfather never stopped looking for it. He passed that obsession down to my father, who passed it to me." Jason's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "I was 12 when my grandfather died. He made me promise to find that coin and bring it home where it belonged. I've spent 23 years and roughly $40 million trying to keep that promise." The weight of his obsessions settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Laura could see it in his eyes, the single-minded focus that had consumed decades of his life. This wasn't just about money or collecting. This was personal. "So what you're telling me," Laura said slowly, "is that my grandmother was in possession of stolen property." "That's one way to look at it." Jason closed the portfolio. "But I'm not interested in involving law enforcement or insurance companies. That would complicate things for both of us, and frankly, after 60 years, the legal situation is murky at best." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I'm interested in making a deal. A generous deal that benefits everyone involved." Laura felt the walls of the diner closing in around her. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter, the hum louder. "What kind of deal?" Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. The leather was so soft it looked like butter, and the pages were thick as cardstock. $20 million. Laura's vision blurred. 20 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, meaningless. She tried to imagine what $20 million looked like, what it felt like, what it could do. It would solve every problem she'd ever had and create possibilities she'd never dared to dream of. "You're joking." "I never joke about money, Miss Davis." $20 million for the coin, plus another $1 million for your inconvenience and discretion. He began writing, the pen gliding across the paper with barely a whisper. "The check can be in your hands within the hour." Laura watched him write, her mind reeling. $21 million. She could pay off her student loans, buy a house, travel the world, help her sister with her kids' college funds. She could quit both jobs and never worry about rent or groceries or medical bills again, but something nagged at her, a voice in the back of her mind that sounded suspiciously like her grandmother's. Eleanor had been cautious about the coin, scared enough to back out of selling it. Why? What had frightened a woman who had lived through poverty and hardship and never backed down from anything? "Why so much?" Laura asked. "If it's worth $14 million, Why are you offering 20? Jason paused in his writing, looking up with surprise. Because I want this transaction to be clean and final. No regrets, no second thoughts, no going to the media with stories about the poor waitress who got cheated by the evil billionaire. His honesty was disarming, but it also revealed something else. He was desperate. Men worth $12 billion didn't offer 50% premiums unless they were operating from a position of desperation, not strength. You said the legal situation was murky, Laura pressed. What did you mean? Jason set down his pen, studying her with new interest. You're sharper than I expected. You've been watching me for weeks. You should know exactly how sharp I am. A genuine smile crossed his face for the first time since he'd entered the diner. Fair point. The legal situation is complicated because the statute of limitations has run out on the original theft. Even if we could prove your grandmother acquired it illegally, which we can't, no prosecutor would take the case after 60 years. So technically it's mine. Technically, yes, but ownership is about more than legal technicalities, isn't it? It's about rightful possession, about restoring things to where they belong. His voice took on an almost evangelical fervour. That coin has been in my family's collection for over 80 years. My grandfather searched for it until the day he died. My father spent his inheritance trying to find it. It's not just an object to us. It's a piece of our history, our legacy. Laura could hear the pain in his voice, the weight of generations of loss and searching. But she could also hear something else, something that made her deeply uncomfortable. Entitlement. The assumption that his desire, his family's pain, somehow trumped her legal ownership. What about my grandmother's legacy? Laura asked quietly. She had that coin for 60 years. She could have sold it dozens of times, but she didn't. Maybe it meant something to her too. Jason's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Your grandmother was in possession of stolen property. She may not have known it initially, but when she tried to sell it and the auction houses started asking questions, she figured it out. She chose to keep something that didn't belong to her. The accusation hung between them like poison gas. Laura felt her cheeks flush with anger. You don't know anything about my grandmother. She was the most honest person I've ever known. If she kept that coin, she had a good reason. I'm sure she was a lovely woman, Jason said, his tone patronizing. But lovely people sometimes make questionable choices when faced with financial pressure. The condescension in his voice ignited something fierce in Laura's chest. She'd spent her entire adult life being talked down to by people who had more money, more education, more everything. She was tired of being treated like her circumstances made her somehow less worthy of respect. You know what I think? Laura said, her voice rising enough that Marcy glanced over from behind the counter. I think you're scared. I think after 23 years of searching and $40 million spent, you're terrified that this coin might slip away from you again. That's why you're offering so much money so quickly. Jason's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. You have no idea what this means to me. Then explain it to me. Make me understand why this piece of metal is worth more to you than my grandmother's memory or my financial security. Jason was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than it had been all morning. My grandfather wasn't just a collector. He was a historian, a man who believed that preserving the past was essential to understanding the future. That coin wasn't just valuable to him because of its monetary worth. It was a direct connection to one of the most pivotal moments in human history. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a photograph of an elderly man standing in what appeared to be a vast library. The man's eyes were kind but intense, and he was holding what looked like an ancient manuscript. Constantine's conversion to Christianity changed the course of Western civilization. Those 12 coins were minted to commemorate not just an emperor's death, but the birth of a new world order. My grandfather spent his life studying that period, and owning one of those coins was like holding a piece of history in his hands. Jason's voice grew thick with emotion. When he died, I inherited his passion along with his fortune. Every business deal I've made, every company I've built has been in service of that promise I made to him, to bring our history home. Laura found herself moved, despite her anger. She could see the 12-year-old boy in Jason's eyes making a promise to a dying grandfather, but she could also see the dangerous obsession that promise had created, the way it had consumed his life and now threatened to consume hers. I understand that it means a lot to you, Laura said carefully. But it's not just about what you want. That coin has been part of my family for 60 years. Maybe my grandmother had her own reasons for keeping it, reasons that had nothing to do with money. Jason leaned back, studying her with new calculation. What would it take? The question was simple, but Laura could hear the layers beneath it. This was a negotiation now, not a demand. She had power in this situation, real power, and Jason Moore was finally acknowledging it. I need time to think, Laura said. This is the biggest decision of my life, and I'm not making it in a diner booth with you staring at me like I'm some kind of criminal. Jason nodded slowly. How much time? A week. 3 days? 5 days? Deal. Jason stood, leaving the check on the table. Laura could see the amount written in his precise handwriting. $21 million. But understand this, Miss Davis. I'm not the only one who knows about that coin. There are collectors, dealers, and less scrupulous individuals who would do anything to possess it. My offer comes with protection, with legitimacy. Other offers might not be so civilized. The threat was subtle but real, and she felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the true scope of what was at stake. This wasn't just about her and Jason Moore anymore. She was sitting on something that could make her rich beyond imagination, but it could also make her a target. 5 days, she repeated, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Jason nodded and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Miss Davis, that coin has been waiting 60 years to come home. Don't make it wait much longer. The bell chimed as he left, and Laura was alone with the check and the weight of a decision that would change everything. Laura sat frozen in the booth long after Jason Moore disappeared into the city streets. The check lay before her like a loaded weapon, the numbers swimming before her eyes. $21 million. Written in ink that seemed to pulse with possibility and danger in equal measure. Marcy appeared at her elbow, coffee pot in hand and eyes wide with curiosity. What the hell was that about? He looked like he was about to either kiss you or kill you. Laura carefully folded the check and slipped it into her apron pocket. The paper felt warm against her fingers, as if it contained actual fire instead of just the promise of money. Just a customer with strong opinions about apple pie. Laura, honey, I wasn't born yesterday. Men don't write checks at breakfast unless something serious is happening. Marcy slid into the booth across from her, lowering her voice. Are you in some kind of trouble? The question hung in the air, and Laura realized she didn't know the answer. Was she in trouble? Or had trouble just walked out the door, leaving behind an opportunity that could solve every problem she'd ever had? I need to go home, Laura said, untying her apron. Cover for me. Marcy nodded, though concern creased her features. You're sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Laura managed a weak smile. Something like that. The walk to her apartment building felt endless. Every shadow seeming to hide watchers, every passing car a potential threat. Jason's words echoed in her mind. There are collectors, dealers, and less scrupulous individuals who would do anything to possess it. She'd lived her entire life in relative anonymity, invisible to anyone who mattered. Now she felt exposed, vulnerable, like a deer that had suddenly realized it was being hunted. Her building was a converted Victorian that had seen better decades, split into 6 cramped units with paper-thin walls and plumbing that protested every use. Laura climbed the narrow stairs to her second-floor apartment, keys jingling with hands that wouldn't quite steady themselves. Inside, her home felt different, smaller somehow, as if the knowledge of what lay hidden in her bedroom had changed the very dimensions of the space. The familiar became foreign. Her second-hand furniture, her collection of books from library sales, the photograph of her and her grandmother taken just months before Elena's death. In the photo, Elena was smiling, but Laura could see something in her grandmother's eyes that she'd never noticed before. A weight, a sadness that went deeper than age or illness. Had Elena known what burden she was passing on? Had she understood the danger that would come with the inheritance? Laura walked into her bedroom, her steps deliberate and measured. On her dresser sat the small wooden jewellery box that had belonged to Eleanor, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. She'd looked through its contents dozens of times since her grandmother's death, but always casually, treating the items inside as sentimental keepsakes rather than potential treasure. Now she opened it with reverence, her hands trembling slightly as she moved aside her mother's pearl earrings and a silver bracelet Eleanor had worn every day. At the bottom, wrapped in a piece of aged velvet, was the coin. Laura unwrapped it slowly, and even in the dim light of her bedroom, she could see the intricate details that marked it as something extraordinary. The gold caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through her window, and the ancient inscriptions seemed to whisper stories of empires and emperors long dead. She held it up to the light, marvelling at its weight and craftsmanship. This small piece of metal, no larger than a silver dollar, was worth more than most people's homes. It was worth more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes of working double shifts at the diner. But as she examined it more closely, Laura noticed something that made her breath catch. Along one edge, barely visible unless you knew where to look, were tiny scratches that formed what appeared to be initials. E.V. Elena Vasquez. Her grandmother's initials carved into gold that was supposedly stolen 60 years ago. Laura's mind raced. If the coin had been stolen in 1962, why would Elena's initials be on it? Had she added them later, marking her ownership of something she knew she had no right to possess? Or was there another explanation, one that Jason Moore either didn't know or had chosen not to share? She thought back to the stories Elena used to tell, fragments of her past that Laura had always assumed were embellished or simplified for a child's understanding. Elena had grown up poor in Mexico, working as a housekeeper for wealthy American families who spent their winters in warmer climates. She'd met Laura's grandfather, Roberto, when they were both working for the same family, and they'd fallen in love despite the language barrier and cultural differences. But there had always been gaps in the story, periods of Elena's life that she glossed over or changed the subject when Laura asked too many questions. What if those gaps contained the real story of how she'd acquired the coin? Laura's phone buzzed, startling her from her thoughts. A text from an unknown number. Thinking about our conversation. Remember, time is precious for both of us. J.M. The message sent ice through her veins. How had he gotten her number? But even as she wondered, she realized it was a stupid question. A man with Jason Moore's resources could probably access her entire life history with a few phone calls. Another buzz. This time, an image. A photograph of her apartment building taken from across the street, but this one was different from the morning surveillance photo he'd shown her. This one was taken from inside a car, and she could see her own silhouette in her bedroom window, backlit by the afternoon sun. He was watching her right now. Laura moved away from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to tell herself that Jason wasn't dangerous, that he was just a businessman trying to recover a family heirloom. But the surveillance, the implied threats, the casual display of power over her life suggested something darker. She wrapped the coin back in its velvet and placed it in the box, then moved to her living room where she couldn't be seen from the street. Her apartment suddenly felt like a prison, and she realized that her life had fundamentally changed the moment Jason Moore walked into the diner. There was no going back to ignorance, no pretending she didn't possess something that powerful people wanted. Her phone rang, the shrill sound making her jump. The caller ID showed Jason's number. "Hello," Laura answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Miss Davis, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to make sure you understood the full scope of your situation." His voice was different over the phone, somehow more intimate and more threatening at the same time. Laura could picture him sitting in some expensive car across the street, watching her building while he spoke. "I understand perfectly," Laura said. "You want something I have and you're willing to pay for it. It's more complicated than that. The coin world is smaller than you might think, and news travels fast. By now, several other interested parties know that the missing Constantine Solidus has surfaced." Jason's voice carried an edge of urgency. "Some of these individuals are not as patient or as civilized as I am. Are you threatening me? I am warning you. There's a difference." Jason paused, and Laura could hear traffic in the background, confirming her suspicion that he was nearby. "I've spent 15 years building relationships in this world, establishing trust with dealers and collectors. I can protect you from the less scrupulous elements, but only if we reach an agreement." Laura closed her eyes, trying to think clearly through the fear and confusion. "What happens if I don't sell to you? Then you'll be on your own with something worth $20 million and no legitimate way to sell it. The major auction houses will ask questions you can't answer. Private collectors will lowball you or try to take it by force. And every day you hold on to it, you'll be looking over your shoulder wondering who's watching and what they're planning." The picture he painted was terrifying in its plausibility. Laura had no connections in the art world, no knowledge of how to authenticate or sell something of this value. She was a waitress from a working-class family, completely out of her depth in a world of high-stakes collecting and international commerce. "There's something else," Jason continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something I didn't mention at the diner because I wasn't sure you were ready to hear it." Laura's grip tightened on the phone. "What? Your grandmother didn't steal that coin, Miss Davis. She was given it as payment for services rendered. Services to my family." The words hit Laura like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Elena Vasquez worked as a housekeeper for my grandfather's winter estate in Palm Springs from 1961 to 1963. She was there during the robbery, and she helped identify what was taken. More importantly, she provided information that led to the recovery of several other pieces." Laura's mind reeled. Eleanor had worked for the Moore family? How had Jason failed to mention this crucial detail during their first conversation? "My grandfather was grateful for her assistance, and he gave her the coin as a reward." It was legal, legitimate, and documented in his private papers. But when the insurance company found out about the payment, they threatened to void the claim on the other stolen pieces unless he reported it as theft as well. The truth was shifting under Laura's feet like quicksand. So he lied to the insurance company. He chose to protect the family's financial interests over one employee's reward. It was a business decision, nothing more. Jason's voice carried no trace of apology or shame. "But it means your grandmother was the rightful owner of that coin, which makes you the rightful owner now." Laura felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger. Eleanor hadn't been a thief or a fence for stolen goods. She'd been an honest woman caught in the middle of a rich man's financial maneuvering. "Then why are you offering to buy it back?" Laura asked. "If it's legally mine, why not just let me keep it?" "Because it belongs with the rest of the collection." "Because my grandfather regretted that decision for the rest of his life. Because some things are worth more than their legal ownership." Jason's voice grew intense, passionate. "That coin is part of a set, Miss Davis. Separated from the others, it's just an expensive piece of metal. Together, they tell the story of an empire, of the moment when the ancient world became the modern world." Laura could hear the obsession in his voice again, the single-minded focus that had driven him for more than 2 decades. But now, she also heard something else. Genuine love for history. For the stories these ancient objects could tell. This wasn't just about ownership or family honour. This was about preserving something that connected the present to the distant past. "I need to see the documentation," Laura said. "The papers that prove my grandmother was given the coin legally." "Of course. I can have copies to you within the hour. And I want to know about the other collectors, the ones you say aren't as civilized as you are. I want names, backgrounds, what they're capable of." Jason was quiet for a moment. "That's a dangerous conversation to have over the phone. Then we'll have it in person. Tomorrow, somewhere public." Laura was surprised by her own assertiveness, but the knowledge that Eleanor had been honest, that the coin was rightfully hers, had given her a new sense of confidence. "And I want to see the rest of the collection to understand what you're asking me to be part of." "You're negotiating." Jason sounded impressed. "I underestimated you, Miss Davis." "People usually do. It's one of my advantages." Jason chuckled, a sound that contained genuine warmth for the first time since she'd met him. "Very well, tomorrow at 2:00, the Metropolitan Museum. Meet me in the Greek and Roman galleries. And Miss Davis?" "Yes?" "Bring the coin. It's time you saw where it truly belongs." After Jason hung up, Laura sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, processing everything that had changed in a single day. This morning she'd been a struggling waitress with rent problems and no prospects. Tonight she was the owner of a $20 million artifact and the focal point of a high-stakes game she barely understood. But for the first time since Jason Moore had walked into the diner, Laura felt like she had some control over her situation. Tomorrow she would learn the truth about the coin, about the collection it belonged to, and about the forces that were gathering around her small apartment in the shadow of wealth beyond imagination. The coin lay in its box on her dresser, ancient gold catching the streetlight from her window. In 12 hours, she would have to decide whether to sell it to Jason Moore for $21 million, or hold onto it and face whatever consequences came with refusing one of the most powerful men in the country. Laura had never made a decision worth more than a few $100s. Tomorrow she would make one that could change the course of her entire life. The Metropolitan Museum's Greek and Roman galleries stretched before Laura like a marble cathedral, each display case holding treasures that had survived millennia. She'd arrived early, wanting to study the space and calm her nerves before facing Jason Moore again. The coin sat heavy in her purse, wrapped in its familiar velvet, a secret weight that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. She'd spent the night researching Constantine Solidus coins, diving deep into online auction records and museum catalogues. What she'd discovered had both thrilled and terrified her. The coins were legendary among collectors, appearing in sales so rarely that each emergence caused ripples throughout the international art world. The last public auction had generated headlines in financial newspapers, with bidders flying in from 6 continents to compete for a single piece. Laura paused before a display of Roman coins, studying their arrangement behind pristine glass. Each one was accompanied by detailed provenance information, documenting its journey from ancient mint to modern museum. The legitimacy was clear, unquestioned, protected by institutional authority. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Laura turned to find Jason Moore approaching, dressed more casually than yesterday, but still radiating that unmistakable aura of wealth and power. He wore dark slacks and a navy sweater that probably cost more than her monthly salary, and his eyes held the same intense focus she remembered from the diner. "They tell stories," Laura said, surprised by her own composure. "Each one is like a time capsule." Jason smiled, and for the first time she saw genuine warmth in his expression. "Exactly. You understand what most people miss. They see the monetary value and forget that these pieces are windows into lost worlds." He gestured toward a nearby display case containing coins from various Roman emperors. "This is why I collect. Not for the investment potential or the prestige, but for the connection to history. When you hold a coin like yours, you're touching something that was held by people who lived through the birth of Christianity, the fall of paganism, the transformation of an empire." Laura studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculated charm. But his passion seemed authentic, the enthusiasm of someone who had found his life's purpose in preserving the past. "You brought the documentation?" she asked. Jason nodded, reaching into a leather portfolio. "Everything you requested. My grandfather's private papers, correspondence with your grandmother, and the original insurance claim that complicated everything. He handed her a thick folder, and Laura opened it with trembling fingers. The first document was a letter dated March 15th, 1963, written in elegant handwriting on letterhead bearing the Moore family crest. As she read, the story of her grandmother's involvement with the Moore family unfolded in careful detail. Eleanor Vasquez had indeed worked as head housekeeper at the Palm Springs estate during the winter of 1962 to 63. She'd been present during the robbery, had helped catalogue what was stolen, and had provided crucial information about suspicious individuals she'd observed on the property in the weeks leading up to the break-in. Her assistance had led directly to the recovery of several stolen pieces and the arrest of 2 members of the theft ring. But it was the final paragraph of the letter that made Laura's breath catch. In recognition of your loyalty and courage during this difficult time, I am pleased to present you with this Constantine Solidus as a token of the Moore family's gratitude. May it serve as a reminder that integrity and honour are worth more than gold, though, in this case, you possess both. The letter was signed by Harrison Moore, Jason's grandfather, and below it was Elena's signature acknowledging receipt of the coin. Laura looked up to find Jason watching her intently. She earned it. She more than earned it. She risked her job and potentially her safety to help us. My grandfather wanted to do more for her, but she was too proud to accept what she called charity. Jason's voice carried a note of admiration. She was remarkable, your grandmother. I remember meeting her once when I was very young. She made the best empanadas I'd ever tasted and spoke to me like I was a real person, not just the heir to a fortune. The personal connection surprised Laura. You met her. Several times. She worked for us for almost 3 years, not just the winter she helped with the robbery. My grandfather trusted her completely. Jason paused, his expression growing complicated. Which is why what happened next was so painful for everyone involved. Laura turned the page and found copies of insurance documents, correspondence with investigators, and what appeared to be legal briefs. The story that emerged was messier than Jason had initially portrayed. The insurance company had indeed threatened to void the entire claim if they discovered that Harrison Moore had given away any of the supposedly stolen items. But rather than report the gift to Eleanor immediately, Harrison had attempted to negotiate with the insurers, arguing that the coin was payment for services rather than stolen property. The insurance company had refused to accept the distinction. In their view, any item reported as stolen that was subsequently given away constituted fraud. They'd given Harrison an ultimatum: report the coin as stolen and assist in its recovery, or face cancellation of a $40 million claim on the other pieces. He chose the money, Laura said, her voice flat. He chose to protect the family's financial future, Jason corrected. But he never forgot the cost of that decision. He spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. Laura flipped through more documents, finding evidence of Harrison's attempts to locate Eleanor after she'd left their employment. Private investigators had tracked her to 3 different states before losing her trail completely. There were records of donations made to Hispanic community organizations, college scholarships established in her name, and even attempts to locate her through church networks. He never found her, Laura realized. She didn't want to be found. Can you blame her? From her perspective, she'd been loyal to a family that had rewarded her honesty by branding her a thief. Jason's voice carried genuine regret. My grandfather died believing he'd betrayed the one person who truly helped us during that terrible time. The weight of the story settled over Laura like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about money or collecting anymore. It was about guilt, redemption, and the kind of wounds that could span generations. The other collectors you mentioned, Laura said, closing the folder. Tell me about them. Jason's expression darkened. There are 3 you need to know about. Marcus Chen, based in Hong Kong, has been trying to corner the market on Constantine pieces for a decade. He's wealthy, patient, and absolutely ruthless when it comes to acquiring what he wants. He's also not particularly concerned with legal niceties. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean? It means he's been known to acquire pieces through intermediaries who don't ask too many questions about ownership. If he knows your coin exists, he'll find a way to get it, whether you're willing to sell or not. Jason moved closer, lowering his voice. Then there's Dmitry Volkov, a Russian oligarch with a passion for ancient coins and a complete disregard for international law. He's been sanctioned by 3 different governments and has a private security team that doubles as acquisition specialists. The museum suddenly felt less safe, less public. Laura glanced around at the other visitors, wondering if any of them might be watching her, reporting back to collectors who would stop at nothing to possess her inheritance. And the third, Isabelle Moreau, French, sophisticated and utterly without scruples. She runs a network of dealers and forgers throughout Europe, and she's been trying to reconstruct complete ancient coin sets for her private clients. A missing Constantine Solidus would be the crown jewel of her career. Laura's mouth went dry. How do they know about the coin? The collector world is smaller than you think, and news travels at the speed of money. When I started making inquiries about your grandmother 3 weeks ago, other people noticed. When I had the replica made for authentication purposes, the artisan I used has connections throughout the community. Jason's voice was grim. By now, they all know the 12th coin has surfaced and they're all making plans to acquire it. The reality of her situation crashed over Laura like a cold wave. She wasn't just choosing between Jason's offer and keeping the coin. She was choosing between Jason's protection and facing a collection of international criminals who viewed her as an obstacle to be removed. "You orchestrated this," Laura said, the realization hitting her like a slap. "You made sure the other collectors would know about the coin, so I'd have no choice but to sell to you." Jason's composure didn't crack, but Laura caught a flicker of something that might have been shame in his eyes. "I made inquiries through established channels. I followed proper protocols for authenticating and recovering family property. If that created attention from other parties, it was an unavoidable consequence of doing things legally." Bullshit. Laura's voice carried enough venom to make a nearby security guard glance in their direction. "You could have approached me quietly, handled this privately. Instead, you created a feeding frenzy and then positioned yourself as my savior." "I positioned myself as the rightful owner trying to recover a family heirloom," Jason said, his voice hardening. "Everything I've done has been legitimate and above board. I can't control what other collectors do with information that's already in circulation." Laura studied his face, searching for the truth beneath his polished explanations. She could see the calculation there, the strategic mind that had built a $12 billion empire. Jason Moore didn't make moves without considering all possible outcomes, and the pressure from other collectors served his interests perfectly. But she could also see something else, genuine concern for her safety. Whatever games he might be playing, he seemed to understand that she was now in real danger, and he appeared to feel some responsibility for that fact. "Show me the collection," Laura said. "I want to see what you're asking me to complete." Jason nodded, leading her through the galleries to a quieter wing of the museum. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through a private photo album, then handed it to her. Laura stared at the photographs on Jason's phone, 11 ancient coins arranged in perfect symmetry within a climate-controlled display case. Each Constantine Solidus gleamed with the patina of centuries, their golden surfaces telling the story of an empire's transformation. But it was the empty space in the centre that captured her attention, a void that seemed to pulse with possibility and purpose. "It's been waiting for 60 years, Jason said softly, his obsession laid bare in those simple words. Laura handed back the phone, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. This wasn't about money anymore, or even about justice for her grandmother's memory. It was about understanding that some things belonged together, that history deserved to be preserved whole rather than fractured by human greed and circumstance. 25 million, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Jason's eyes widened. I offered 21. That was before I knew about Chen, Volkov, and Moreau. Danger costs extra. Laura smiled, feeling the power shift between them one final time. Take it or leave it. Jason extended his hand and Laura shook it, sealing a deal that would transform her life forever. But as they walked back through the galleries, past treasures that had survived conquest and time, Laura realized the greatest treasure wasn't the fortune she'd gained. It was the knowledge that her grandmother had been exactly the woman she'd always believed her to be. Honest, courageous, and worthy of remembrance. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't found in ancient tombs or forgotten vaults. Sometimes they're sitting in a jewelry box on a bedroom dresser, waiting for the right moment to change everything.